Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Medicine Weavers podcast, where we share stories of health, healing, and transformation. My name is Sarah Tacoma, and I'm an herbalist and neurolinguistic programming practitioner. And this is our first episode. I'm really excited, so I wanted to just share with you a little bit about why I'm starting this journey. As an herbalist, I find that I can definitely sway more towards the herbal way of healing and alternative medicine in general. And sometimes I can be closed off to other ideas, or I don't even know about other practices that exist, other tools that are in other people's toolboxes. And I'm a very curious person, and I learn best through storytelling, where I can really kind of dive in with my own emotions and empathy, and it really helps me to absorb the information better and retain it longer. So having conversations with people around how they've found healing is kind of the best way for me to learn and expand my own understanding around healing that I can bring then into my practice when I'm working with people one-on-one. Now, I figured if I'm going to be doing that, I may as well be recording these conversations because I'm sure I'm not the only one out there who's curious. So if you would bear with me and try out this first episode with me and see how you like it, I would love to hear from you. So if you like it, please subscribe, or rate the episode below. Anything that you do in that realm can help. So let's dive in a little bit. Today's episode, I talked to Kayla Lamrock. Now, she is from a military family. She was born into a military family. Her father was military, and then she also married someone in the military. So she grew up with a father who had pretty extreme PTSD, and then her husband ended up getting PTSD as well. And so we talk about the effects then on her and how she grew up on a military base where PTSD was normalized, and just the way that family style of living and being around each other was so normal that she didn't realize anything was wrong until she was like a preteen, early teen. And then, of course, as she marries into military too, and she's witnessing this and experiencing this in a different way and having to be the support person for her partner, which can be really difficult. So before we jump into that conversation, I just want to talk a little bit about PTSD. So PTSD has a long and controversial history with varying opinions. After the American Civil War in the 1860s, many physicians labeled traumatized veterans as having a cardiac injury that they nicknamed soldier's heart. And some simplified it even further by saying they suffered from a case of nostalgia. So fascinating. But by World War I, physicians began using the term shell shock because they considered the symptoms to be psychological reactions to the intense shock waves that emanated from artillery explosions. Of course, like that would seem the most rational cause because they had only really witnessed PTSD in large amounts with military. Of course, these like smaller individual cases of PTSD within small communities, you have one or two people affected by other traumas, they're not getting quite the same attention on them. So psychiatrists are not witnessing these events as much. So it seems to be linked with military. And so during World War II, the military recognized PTSD as combat fatigue, but then noticed that those affected seemed to do better with emotional support and quick return to active duty, because they also noticed that these people who suffered from this combat fatigue, they did a lot better when they were with other people who understood what they had gone through. They understood, and there was like empathy there, and there was camaraderie. So they ended up just kind of shuffling them like right back into the system again from where they got PTSD in the first place. So it wasn't until the Vietnam War that mental health professionals began holding what they called rap groups with Vietnam veterans about their experiences, and began exploring the condition with much, much more attention. In the early 80s, the American Psychiatric Association finally formally accepted PTSD as a legitimate diagnostic category in the DSM. So the DSM defined it at the time as exposure to a traumatic event that was entirely external to the individual and outside the range of usual human experience. But we know it's not limited to just that, right? It's so much broader than that. So they did end up changing it shortly thereafter. They changed the definition and dropped the requirement for the stressor to be outside the range of normal experience. And then they also included indirect witness to a traumatic event or having a loved one go through a traumatic event. So it's almost like PTSD through someone else. I have my own judgments about the DSM as a whole and the obvious influence of big pharma on its content, for sure. But that aside, I'm glad to see that they're including PTSD in there. They now have a whole chapter on trauma and stressor-related disorders. So that's great that that's in there. But there's still a lot of controversy around PTSD and the diagnosis. There are plenty of psychologists and psychiatrists that argue that PTSD is underdiagnosed and that there's many more out there suffering from PTSD without that added help of maybe therapy supports, or maybe disability supports. On the other hand, though, there is a growing group of professionals who argue against the broader definition of PTSD and claim that by diagnosing it, we're pathologizing a natural human reaction to a really highly disturbing incident and labeling these people as damaged, lesser than, or broken, when they're actually just experiencing a very normal reaction to something that was very traumatic. And these same practitioners or professionals are actually noticing that the majority of trauma survivors actually achieve much higher levels of personal maturity, wisdom, well-being, and success, known now as a phenomenon called post-traumatic growth. And that's, of course, if they get support through the healing process, right? So this is a really interesting, multi-layered, nuanced topic. So much to dive into, of course, but today we're just going to be talking to Kayla about her personal experience with PTSD, growing up in a house with PTSD, and being married to, and experiencing it herself and how she had to work through it. I also just want to say that nothing we discuss on this podcast should be taken as medical advice. These are simply shared stories of personal healing, personal journeys through health dilemmas. And with that said, let's dive in. So hi, Kayla. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me. The first one.
the first one of our podcast. So it'll be maybe a bit of trial and error, but it'll be really fun. I'm excited.
Yeah, likewise.
So you reached out when I put the call out on Instagram for people who wanted to share their stories. You were one of the first people to reach out.
Yeah.
And
spend a lot of time on Instagram.
We all do.
Yeah.
Let's not lie. We have our moments.
Yeah.
So I want to ask why you wanted to share your story, first of all.
Yeah, so the reason I want to share my story is I remember being a child lost in my lifestyle and just wishing I had someone or something to connect to or to understand or not feel so alone. I was raised as a military child. My dad was in the military, and I later married a person in the military. So it's a community that I've had a lot of experience with in how I've identified myself, what I wanted to do for work, all my friends. It was every side of my life. And so in sharing that I understand that experience, I hope to provide healing for others experiencing that and build that connection that we are feeling a lot of similar ways in a similar situation, despite it actually being very isolating.
Yeah, well, it's like, as Brene Brown says, right? Like empathy. Well, no, is it? It's like shame shame can't grow where there is empathy. Like there's something powerful
Yeah.
healing about sharing your story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your story is very unique to me. Like the military is so outside of my world of understanding.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, if people are not involved in the military, they have no idea.
Exactly.
It's a whole other world.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to kind of
Yeah.
dig in a little bit and find out what that's like,
Mm-hmm.
and hear how you worked through it.
Yeah.
So where does your story begin? I realize
Yeah.
it really begins at the very beginning because you're a product of the military. You were
Yeah.
raised in it.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So,
my dad joined the military right out of high school so that he knew that's what he wanted to do. And he was an amazing soldier. So he's since retired. But I grew up in a home that was very proud, very honored to be Canadian, that our dad protected our country. Um, so that was the beginning. We grew up on a military base in Petawawa. So all I knew was the military lifestyle. I lived on a base. I went to school on a base. The base in Petawawa had a movie theater, it had a community center, it had a grocery store, and then the town below the base was all military as well. So everyone at the grocery store, anywhere you went, everyone knew everyone. So I really truly grew up in this environment where people understood and were living the same way.
it was your own world.
Absolutely.
It was the whole
Yeah.
world. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and my dad was in a very unique situation where we stayed 12 years there, which is very unheard of. However, for me as a child, I didn't have that continuity. My teachers would change because they were often spouses of military members. The kids in my class would change. It's not like I stayed in the same school, in the same place with the same kids. The kids were coming and going because they were being moved in and out, but I was still there. So every year, the building I was in was the same. The places I went were the same, but the people I knew and my friends weren't the same. So every single year, sometimes throughout the year, we were getting new kids in, making new friends, and they were gone just as quick as they came. So I had a similar experience to a child that was moved around a lot, except I didn't move.
Oh, it's so fascinating. Yeah, and different because you're not having to like find your way around a new town, but you're the consistent.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
exactly.
you're that consistent, reliable person
Yeah,
that's in it, and everything around you is changing. That's so unique.
yes.
And so why were you guys not moving around so much?
Just the nature of the job that my dad had.
Okay.
He was actively deploying, which means he was going on tour. He did 7 deployments, which means my sister and I did 7 deployments overseas. So just the position he was in, he was a great soldier and he wanted to continue serving his country. And so we stayed. Yeah.
Wow. So when he got deployed, you would stay on that base?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a home there.
Yeah.
It's called personal military quarters. It's military housing. Not every base is set up the exact same, but Petawawa was. So, like a rental, we had a full house. It was a duplex. So that's where we lived, and he would go away and come back and go away and come back, and yeah.
And I guess what's kind of beautiful about that is that the other friends you had there, they also were used to like fathers going and coming back. So it was normalized. It's not like you were seeing that picture perfect dad who's home all the time.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Which later became almost shocking. It was culture shock to me to then be posted out once we finally were. We were posted here to Meaford. And this is a farming community where people have lived their whole lives.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I was with people that had known each other forever. Their families knew each other. They were all connected.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. And suddenly the questions were being asked. Why does your dad go overseas? What does he do over there? How come he's angry or scary? My friends were scared of him. They were asking questions I had never thought of. Why does he carry a gun? I didn't know any of those things. I never even questioned why he might carry a gun.
Of course, because it was normalized.
It was normal. Like, he went over there and he kept people safe.
Yeah.
He was keeping us safe.
Yeah.
We sent pencils and treats and toys at Christmas for the kids over there, and he would hand them out, and we would get pictures back eventually of them handing out toys and kids smiling. Never for 1 second did I make the connection to why or what he was doing over there until I came here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So did you find that jarring?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was the first time where I was like, something is different.
Mm-hmm.
And then around that time, he was also diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, which we now refer to as a post-traumatic stress injury. For the sake of language, it's not a disorder, it's an injury, and there's healing and things you can do to heal from that.
Yeah, it's a brain injury.
Exactly. So that was kind of the beginning of, you know, realizing that something was different and not necessarily right. Like, the things I was experiencing, knowing now that were PTSD, were starting to come to light. I was starting to see them, and I was turning 13, so I was starting to pay attention to those things and not have answers to the questions that I was being asked.
So you referenced like your friends maybe even being scared of your dad. So your dad, like, can you describe, was he like unpredictable, like classic signs of PTSD? Did you know as a child, did you learn to kind of suss out when you could be playful with him? Or
so we just knew things and did things because that's all we knew. So for example, if we were in a place that was very crowded, we knew to stay within arm's reach of him, and we knew not to walk on the grass. We never ever walked, we wouldn't run across a field. We just wouldn't do that. When we go into a restaurant or something, he would lead the way and choose where to sit. If, like, we didn't go through drive-throughs because all of these things were potential risk. We don't do, like, we'd never walk into the room and go, boo. Never, something like that. Yes, the unpredictability was there, but he was always, when he was present, he was always very affectionate with us, and would have fun. We had so much fun together. But as those symptoms became worse and worse and worse and more challenging for him, he became more and more angry, isolated, and it's hard to describe, but when you're speaking with somebody that is not there, so whether they're in a flashback, intrinsic memory, when their mind is somewhere else, it's like a glossed over zombie-like face. Like, his eyes would just go blank, his face would go blank, and you could say something and he just was not there. So for an example, we were coming back from Owen Sound one day and he had a flashback, and I had to grab the steering wheel and just keep the car straight, because I knew he would come out of it. It didn't last long, fortunately, but just because I could tell that he wasn't there anymore. He wasn't driving that car home from Owen Sound. His mind was somewhere else. So,
and how old were you?
Maybe 14,
Wow.
15, yeah.
It's so fascinating, right? Because even if you were still on the base, that would be, other kids would be like, oh yeah, like it wouldn't be a big deal. Yeah,
that, and potentially the member would be more comfortable and those things wouldn't happen on the base. So that's what for my dad, he was completely fine on the base because he had protection, he had his brother in arms there.
Yeah, right.
He had that was a situation where he was comfortable in. So leaving the base is when these things. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, patrolling a vehicle, walking around, checking the lights, saying things. So in the middle of the night, he would patrol the house, and we would have to say things like, this area is being cleared, like if he came into our rooms at night. Because if we said, oh, hi, daddy, like it could, if he is mentally in a place, say overseas, and we say something like that, it's a threat. It doesn't make sense in that environment. So for us to protect ourselves until he is present again, we had to
play the role.
To make that environment make sense so that he could do what he had to do in his brain to create safety.
Yeah.
And then
be present. Come back. Yeah,
exactly.
It's really interesting, and you can see how it's such a great thing in a way, right? Like he's constantly aware of safety. And I think that men in general, if we can generalize, they are programmed to be the safety provider, the protector. Yeah. So all this stuff is like playing right into like his kind of core essence, probably. Yeah. Like that primal drive, really. But it's so amped up. Yeah. It's so amped up.
And it doesn't make sense here.
No.
So over there, it would make perfect sense. Yeah. And that would be a normal way to live. Here, it doesn't make sense. So it's like, for him, and we've had this discussion, it's this push and pull. Like, I have to be this person here, but everything inside of him is saying, be hypervigilant, create safety, act that way. Because that's what's making him feel safe. But he knows that doesn't make sense here. Yeah. He doesn't have to do that here. But for him, he does.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did all of that play out for you later in life? Like as a teen, even growing up? Yeah, absolutely. There's still things to this day that I do without even thinking. For example, like coming into a room, I'll often announce that I'm coming into the room. Like I'll say, like at home, or if I'm like if I'm downstairs and coming upstairs, I will say I'm coming upstairs, to create that warning almost. Yeah. To create like, hi, I'm coming, because I don't want to be in a surprise of a situation and have to create that. And that's something that I've really struggled with, is being the reason I'm going to trigger someone. I'm going to make them have an emotional reaction. Right. So I stay quiet. I often feel very paralyzed. I often will sit and run through my brain. Like, I'm going to walk up the stairs and I'm going to do this, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. So I play that out, and I play it out in every scenario I can think of. Like a soldier would. Yes, before I can actually bring myself to go and just do it. Like the thought of, just going to the bathroom to brush my teeth. Like, there's so much more to that. Right. Yeah. Not all the time, but like when I'm really in that place. Yeah. So it really impacts like the minutia of life. Yeah. It leaks out in all the little ways. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so then you ended up also marrying a military man. Yeah. So tell me how that came about. Yeah. So we met in college, and I decided I wanted to go to university. And when we kind of went our separate ways, we didn't date or anything. We had just met each other and spent some time together. And in that time, he decided to join the military. So I went to university, and we connected a couple of years later. And he said, yeah, I'm actually on deployment in the Mediterranean Sea. He had joined the Navy, and I was like, oh my goodness. So anyway, one thing led to another, and we decided to be together. And I remember saying to my grandpa, I said, Grandpa, am I crazy? Like, I hadn't dated military. I wasn't interested in that lifestyle. And he looked at me and he said, it's all you know, honey. Yeah. And I said, okay, yeah, I got this. And it's true. Like, I did, and I fell into the role beautifully. And in a lot of ways, it was comforting. He lived in Halifax at the time. I had already fallen in love with Halifax, visiting with a friend. Yeah. And I remember looking at moving there, and we were looking
where he was living at the time was right around the corner of the base, and it gave me butterflies. It was so exciting to move. I'm going to get emotional, back to what felt like home.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
So it was comforting.
It was comforting.
It was comforting. It was what you knew.
Yeah.
It was like your childhood safety and security.
Exactly. Yeah, because by that time my parents had split up. I had moved with my mom and my sister to London, and I had gone to high school and college and university, and I had been living in the city, and I had lost, my dad had retired in the meantime, and I had lost a piece of that identity. So going back there felt like, I get to go home.
Yeah.
So, and I did, and I walked onto that base, and I got a job in exactly the career that I wanted to do.
Which was?
Working with military families. So I had done my early childhood education in college, then gone to university for family studies and sociology, all with the intention of working with military families. At the time that Nick and I had met, I was applying for jobs across Canada to work with military families.
And working with them in what capacity?
Yeah, so each base across Canada has a military family resource center. It's like a one-stop shop for families. So you can go there for financial advice and support. A lot of them have childcare options. There are some mental health supports, and they also do a lot of psychoeducational like training and courses, a lot of connecting with overseas. So they do like a lot of programs for deployed families. They take care of all the mail. So if you put a care package together, it's the MFRC that organizes and makes sure it gets over there with the unit. So just lots of stuff like that. I grew up going to MFRCs. I grew up volunteering later. So yeah, it was so much a piece of who I was that going back there just felt like this is it. This is everything to me. And it was. And so when I walked in, I started as an early childhood educator. The daycare there was all military children, all military families. So it flowed perfectly.
Yeah.
And from there, I moved into a family programming and parenting programming position. So I would run like new baby programs, especially for moms that were home with baby and dad was often away or working, and what the challenges were living the military lifestyle with a brand new baby. Like tyke programs where parents could come with their littles and just be in community and let them get their energy out, all the way to prenatal programming, and then large scale events. So a few times a year we would do these huge events for 300 to 500 people in attendance, just for military families. And then from there, I moved into youth programming. So the base in Halifax has a full youth center.
Amazing.
Which is really cool. Yeah. So, I was doing youth care from 8 to 18. So a youth drop-in center running programming, and that's all kinds of programming. So social, athletic, physical programming, to psychoeducational, to one of my favorites was a girls program, so girls 11 to 13, 14, right in that prime age where I was trying to figure all this stuff out. Yeah. So.
And so that was kind of like a dream come true.
It was.
You're in a place that is familiar. You're doing the job you love to do.
Exactly.
So then what came of that?
So it was everything. It was my community. It was my relationship. It was my childhood. I couldn't see, think, breathe without military. I was on 24/7. And so when my partner came back from his second deployment, he was diagnosed with severe PTSD as well, and depression.
Ooh.
So it took me right back, and I burnt myself out because I was a caretaker for him. I was a caretaker at work. There was still stuff I was working through that I had been through with like growing up that way.
Yeah.
So it swallowed me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And were you able to find help? Like, did you realize you needed help?
Yes, it's there's strides. A lot of good things are happening. The situation that I was in, because I was so intertwined, it was my job. Like, the people that I would seek for support were also my colleagues.
Right.
So I essentially lost the support that they could provide for me because of the conflict of interest, right? I can't go to one of my colleagues for mental health support. Like, it was a funny line.
Right.
I lost them as a support because I was also an employee. So it was difficult for me to be in group or community with these people at the MFRC while also being in a professional place and saying, you can come to me and we can hold the space for you, in a time where I needed space to be held for me. So that was very tricky to navigate, because what once felt like coming home, I now felt like it wasn't available anymore.
Yeah.
The situation and that my partner was in at the time, there was a little bit of push and pull there where supports weren't there and weren't being offered, and we were having to jump through a million hoops. And also, he didn't want the support or to jump through the hoops or to do that. He just wanted it to all go away. So there was a lot of just animosity in receiving the help because of the situation we were in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really layered. So with the military, because there is so much PTSD, so much trauma.
Yeah.
Is there readily available help for PTSD, or is there still stigma attached to it within the military?
Yes, so still quite a bit of stigma. My dad uses the example that if you think of any kind of machinery, let's use a tank, for example, in the military context. If something on that tank breaks, you fix it, you replace it with something that works. The military is a well-oiled machine. It has to run the way that it's designed to run in order for it to be effective and in order for it to be kept, to keep one another safe.
Yeah.
You can't just say, oh, you have a broken wheel, but you're good to go anyway.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's just, people are going to get hurt. It's not going to work. Yeah. XYZ.
You can't have people breaking down
exactly
in the middle of whatever's happening.
Yeah. So it's difficult to take a person who may not be ready to go and do that job, but also isn't necessarily damaged and needs to be forgotten about and thrown away. So that's where the difficulty comes in. So there are a lot more supports now than there were. There's a lot more recognition. They have supports and strategies in place. And a lot of outside organizations that kind of have a foot in the door that are providing support as well. So it is there. Sometimes there can be quite a bit of red tape. Right. Sometimes it does put your job on the line. So it is, and also, like we were discussing before, when this is an innate calling for them, they don't want, like, the military member doesn't want to say, you know, I have this going on, I feel I can't sleep, I'm having nightmares, I'm having flashbacks. They want to be there doing the job. So how do they say, okay, I might need some support with this, but also let me do my job?
Yeah, because they know what happens when there's a broken part of the machine.
Exactly. Exactly. So that keeps a lot of it hush hush, and they just bury it under the rug. Ooh. Yeah. That's
so scary, because you think how many people are on active duty that are burying symptoms of PTSD.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which puts everyone at much greater risk too.
Yeah.
So, what a delicate situation. Wow. So, where did you end up finding help?
So I actually, the beginning was choosing to leave the position. So I had recognized I was suffering from burnout. Like I was waking up in the morning in tears, just having to get out the door. Like the thought of getting out the door was just so exhausting that like I it just I was in tears. And so that was like, okay, something needs to give. So I decided to put my resignation in and step away from the position. And that's when the pandemic hit. So I had put my resignation in. I said, I will stay and train the person that you find.
Yeah.
And then we shut down.
Wow.
So I flipped and went to work from home. And I worked from home for almost 6 months still.
Working in the same position?
Yeah, all online.
Wow.
So providing youth support and care and programming online.
Right. Yeah. And then all of a sudden the demand for support probably tripled.
Yeah. So it got worse before it got better. So once I was finally able to step away from that position, and actually that's not true, backing up a little bit, so that would have been March. By June, I made the decision to go on an antidepressant.
Yeah.
So looking back now, I can see the steps that I could have taken. I was so resistant to going on. And then finally my doctor said to me, she said, you know, if you were coming to me with any other illness or ailment, you would take the medicine. If you had pneumonia, you would take medicine for it. Your brain is hurting and sick right now. Take the medicine. So we can talk about pharmaceuticals. Do I necessarily agree? However, it definitely was what I needed in that time.
Yeah.
How it made me feel, I felt so suffocated and so exhausted that medication took the weighted blanket off of me, so I could at least breathe and function without that weight on top of me. Yeah. Once that was lifted, and then I could think, I could see, I could get up, and it wasn't perfect. I'm not saying that this was like all like 1 second I'm sick, the next second I'm better. I'm just saying that taking that weight off was enough to like allow me to do the work and the healing.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a friend about this several years ago, because I had ideas about pharmaceuticals for sure, right? I've always kind of been like, pharmaceuticals. Yeah. There's always other options, exercise, nutrition, blah, 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 blah. And a girlfriend of mine really pointed out to me, she said, yeah, but sometimes you need to take the antidepressants so that you can do the nutrition and the exercise and the journaling and the getting together with friends. And sometimes you need that tool in order to do all those other good things. And eventually maybe you can like wean off, or maybe it's just part of your toolkit that you need to keep, right?
Exactly.
So it's really fascinating. And I'm so glad that it was able to pull that blanket off of you so you could start your healing journey. Yeah,
absolutely. So one thing that the military does provide is really great benefits for family members. Okay. So I was able to see a therapist in different ways. Is that my phone? I think you're ringing. Yeah.
I'm ringing. Of course I am. Terrible. Airplane mode.
Yeah. So I was able to see a therapist without having to pay for it. So I found someone in the community, and fortunately, my parents were advocates for that kind of support. I had been in and out of therapy since I was about 13 when my dad was diagnosed and my parents were splitting up.
Right.
So I'm very fortunate that they were open-minded and kind of instilled that in us.
Yeah, that's great.
My sister is someone that doesn't find as much benefit from it as I do. So again, this is something, it's all individual. But I continue to go and see a therapist. I find it very beneficial. So Yeah, I actually am still seeing the same woman that I saw then. So it's very interesting, like the things that she'll remind me of, like, look at how far you've come. Like, remember when you came into my office and said, XYZ, like, you took full responsibility for what your partner was experiencing. The guilt that I felt walking away from my community, not being able to take care of them and provide for them anymore. All of these things, and now I can separate what was his illness and what was my illness.
Yeah.
Because there was a time where they were one and the same.
Yeah.
His mood affected me and everything that I was experiencing, and mine affected his. And without that separation, it was just unhealthy. Like, it was just very dark, very heavy.
And do you find that you're an empathic person as well?
Mm-hmm.
Because the more I read about empathics, is that they grew up in a family that was really kind of tumultuous, where, one or both parents, their emotions were kind of all over the place, and they had to pick up on all those little nuances. They had to become these open receptors of everyone else's emotions so that they could be safe.
Yes.
But then it puts you in a position later on where you're like, okay, I don't need this anymore, but how do you shut it off? And then you're married to someone who also is wrapped up in a whole bunch of trauma themselves too. And you're probably feeding off of each other.
Yeah. There was a time where he was suicidal, and he speaks about this as well. So, and I would sit on the stairs and wait, because I couldn't reach him. I couldn't help. I couldn't make it go away. I was probably making it worse, being so in his face about it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't leave. So either he was going to come out of it or he was going to harm himself. And I just sat there and waited.
Yeah.
Hours and hours and hours. And he fortunately never harmed himself. But yeah, like, I was hostage to that. Still, when I get really anxious or something comes up for me, my first thought is, I did that, and now that person's going to harm themselves because of me.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's a really heavy thing to carry.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So that's the kind of responsibility that I feel, having been so intertwined with these illnesses.
Yeah, for sure.
So then dismantling my identity as a military child, having to step away from that community, taking that space to say, it's almost like a toxic relationship. I was give, and they were take. Like, just not any one specific person, not any one specific organization, just that environment as a whole. And we're like being so wrapped up and, like you mentioned, layered in it. I had to dismantle that. Who am I out from underneath that thumb? That, when you're a military family member, things like traveling becomes more difficult. Like, I can remember talking about traveling and my dad saying, nope, we'll never go there, because as a military member, you're a threat. They don't like, enemy countries, if they find out that you're a military family, that could put risk. And I mean, some of this is exaggerated a little bit because of his experience. He's seen parts of the world, and the worst of them. So I'm not saying this is a general, but this is the kind of stuff I grew up hearing.
Right. Yeah.
Racism, for example, like, outwardly they're not racist, but I've learned things about different cultures, seeing the worst side of it, which politically we're seeing right now, and then internalizing that. Oh, I can never go there. I can never be friends with this person. I can, because of where they're from. Yeah. So I had to dismantle all of that and understand that none of that was mine. None of that is for me to carry. I can travel and I can move, and I can, so for example, going out in public, not being able to hold my partner's hand because he's in uniform, so I can't hold his hand because if he's in uniform, he is a certain way.
Right.
So just like simple things like that I was living under the thumb of.
Yeah. Yeah, and because you grew up in this too, there's probably things that you're going to continue to find probably for the rest of your life, quite possibly, like little beliefs you have that were given to you, as all of us were given so many beliefs by our parents, our families, our communities, that you're going to be untwisting, like, you know, these general things like, oh, well, yeah, you don't hold your partner's hand when you're walking in public.
Yeah.
Like, oh, no, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to be true all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
These little things. I don't have to announce myself before I come into a room.
Yeah.
I don't have to check a space out before I go and sit down at a table in a restaurant.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Exactly.
So the antidepressants helped you to pull off that blanket. And then you were able to find some resolution, some healing. What have been the steps since then?
Therapy for sure.
Is it like talk therapy? Okay.
And I've also done EMDR, which was helpful. I did that in university, which was helpful. A lot of meditation, a lot of journaling. For me, when sometimes I just write, and the stuff that comes out after, it's like somebody explaining it to me. It's not me putting the words on the paper. It's something else that comes out, and when I can read it back to myself, I understand it.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's not always clear coming out. It's almost like channeled. Like I can write and write and write, and then when I read it back, I'm like, okay, I find that healing. I find that understanding.
Yeah.
There was a time where, like, just early on going on the antidepressants, I felt just so numb isn't the right word because I was feeling, but kind of, you'll understand this as a mother, like touched out.
Yeah.
Emotionally touched out. Like I had so much emotion and I was carrying so much that I was just like, I couldn't even feel it for myself. Like it was just overwhelming. And I would jump in the lake and all year long. And
in the bay.
This was still in Halifax.
Oh, okay.
So the ocean. And just that jolt, hitting the water and feeling that cold jolt, that whole contraction of your body, A, was a release, and B, allowed me to continue feeling. It's a crazy, I would just sit there in the freezing cold water, and it was like, okay, if I can get through this, I can keep going.
Yeah.
Then that was life-saving for me.
Yeah, I feel like that, the cold water therapy, you can call it Wim Hof, you can call it whatever you want. But I got a tub last year.
Oh, wonderful.
And I noticed for myself when I've done it, is that it's like pressing the reset button.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's horrifically uncomfortable. I don't want to be in that cold water.
Yeah.
I definitely don't want to jump in. And yet it's like when I get out, I realize it's like everything's been unplugged and now things are plugged back in and they're turning on and they're not overheated.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, okay, okay, we can close down all the programs. Like, let's just work at this
Control,
base
Alt,
level.
Delete.
Yeah,
it's
down.
true.
Force quit.
Yeah, end task. I don't even know if end task is still a thing anymore.
That's a throwback.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah, so nice. But yeah, and then all of a sudden it kind of restores this like, man, that sucked and that was hard and I did it, right? Yeah, we can do hard things.
We can do hard things. Thanks, Glennon.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and then from there, it got to the point we went to couples counseling, and he said to us, he actually asked my partner to leave because he said, you don't have the capacity to be here right now. So both on what he was experiencing, but also what he was willing to do as well.
Okay.
So he asked him to just step out, go for a walk, get a coffee. And he said to me, like the relationship is not at the forefront here. It needs to take a back seat, because he doesn't have the capacity to even deal with it or work on it. And he said, you are not the problem here, but you're perpetuating this cycle. It's going to continue for both of you until this cycle that we had developed stops. And he said, so when my partner came back, he said, this is what we're going to do. Relationship is off. No focus on the relationship. No trying to work on it. We're working on his illness as an individual. I had a lot of support and stuff and was in a more stable place then. So he said that's what needs to be the focus. And honestly, taking that pressure off showed me that I couldn't be there anymore. I had to step out, and I had tried absolutely everything in my power, and the last thing that I had the ability to do was to leave.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit after that, I had actually come home here to visit, and I said, I can't do it anymore. Because he was right. It was harsh, but he was right. Because what happens in a situation like this is you have me, you have him, and you have the illness. And what was happening was it was him and the illness against me, and me against them, instead of us against the illness.
Right.
And as long as I was in that situation, it was always going to be him and I against each other.
Right.
Because that illness was a third party and was so strong that I became the target. It was easier to target me and fight me than to fight that. So by leaving, he had no choice but to be alone.
face his own illness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So an analogy that I use to describe it is I felt like we were in a cave and all of these boulders were blocking the exit. And so I'm pulling boulders and pulling boulders and pulling boulders and pulling boulders and working and exhausting myself and saying, come help me, come help me, come help me. He doesn't have the ability to help me. So I'm getting more and more angry, more and more resentful.
Yeah.
He's getting more and more resentful because I'm working and digging and digging and digging and won't stop.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have the capacity to continue with me. And when I got out, he didn't want to be out. He wanted to stay. He was comfortable and had decided that that was okay with him to be in the cave.
Wow.
So I was trying, like we had discussed earlier, when somebody doesn't want that for themselves, I can't force him out of that cave.
Yeah.
So for a long time, I sat outside the cave waiting and waiting and waiting. And in some ways, I probably am still doing that because I still want the best for him. I still want him to see that light and find the healing that I feel like I found. But I have to accept and understand that he doesn't want to. His idea of life or contentment might look like being in the cave.
Yeah.
With no preconceived notion on my part, I need to accept and love him for wanting to be in the cave, and also acknowledging and honoring that I don't.
Yeah.
And I need to walk away from the cave. So.
Wow. And like by putting that down and by walking away, that probably allowed you, like that probably lifted a lot off of you and allowed you to heal more too, because you'd taken on the huge burden of trying to heal him.
Exactly.
And you were already starting to feel benefits, right? Getting better, but how can we really, it's really hard to do deep inner healing work when you also feel responsible for another person. Yeah.
And two, there's this ambiguity. Yeah. So we're just did not want to come out. So I'm moving forward and I'm doing these things and I'm seeing the light of day and seeing where my life is going. And so I'm growing and changing as a person, and he's not interested in moving that direction. So on just a relationship and a human level, we have to recognize that I'm now very different. He's very different. And that's neutral. But then understanding that in order for us to be our best selves, then it's different directions for both of us.
Yeah. It's really hard when you are in love with someone who has like these huge boulders on their back, because you're not just agreeing to be in relationship with them.
Yeah.
You're agreeing to be in relationship with that giant boulder.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like I was describing before we started, when we got married, he was planning on a deployment. So we were doing things like writing wills, making big decisions, talking about how life insurance would be divided between taking care of me, taking care of us if that meant an injury for him, his family, his nieces and nephews. So what that looked like, we were making these big life decisions in our newlywed. Like, we didn't really have a time to celebrate or connect, and then before I knew it, he was on deployment, and then he was coming back different.
Yeah.
Right? Having experienced really, really awful things. And so we I mean, it wasn't a fair shot for either of us. This wasn't fair for him, wasn't fair for me.
Yeah.
So
it's a huge thing that doesn't really get talked about. Like, you probably hear about it more having grown up in military, maybe. But as somebody who is not exposed to military, like I know there's a military base here, but like I don't know really many people at all involved in the military. I would not have any idea, right, about all of this other underlying stuff and what you're agreeing to when you agree to get in a relationship with someone who's right in the middle of all of that.
Yeah.
Like that's massive.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so you guys split up and you came back to Meaford. Yeah. And how has your healing journey progressed since then?
Yeah.
Like where has it taken you to?
Honestly, a year ago, it was still difficult. I was working less than part-time, and yeah, like my energy level was just so low. I was talking to a friend the other day, and she said, you came out for the Christmas parade here in Meaford and then you were gone. And I was like, because that's the capacity that I had. And I mean, if you know the parade in Meaford, it's all of 15-20 minutes. It is. And that's the capacity that I had. It was like that was so much at that time that I just needed then quiet. I needed my brain to just be quiet. And it's funny because a lot of people experiencing this need like music or distraction. I honestly would just sit there in silence and just the calming of like nothing happening, so my brain could literally process and shuffle through. And fortunately I have had a lot of counseling to help me do this, but just like the quiet for my brain, like literally going through and just like archiving things, like filing and compartmentalizing things, and like I needed just the downtime to do that. But since then it's night and day. I have more clarity now that I've had in the last 3 years. Wow. I remember in making the decision, I woke up one morning and I looked in the mirror and I said, this has been the hardest year of my life. And provided there was a pandemic in there, which exaggerated everything for all of us. But I said, you've said that the last 3 years. Something's gotta give. What's it gonna be? Yeah. So, and I don't feel that way anymore. I don't wake up and like thinking this has been so hard. So hard. Leaving absolutely was hard, but the growth and the healing since then has just been tenfold, and I'm very fortunate. A big part of that is support. My family has been there for me. When I let them know, I really thought that the world was going to crash when I made that decision. My world as I knew it was going to end, and everyone has just been so loving. Like my family just loves me and has held me. My friends, My sister has been a huge part of it. And yeah, I was just very held. They have a lot of love for him, a lot of respect for him, we have respect for each other. And so, yeah, it's been difficult, but it's also been very beautiful. Where we're sitting right now at Lab Studio Clinic, I wandered in here lost and confused almost exactly a year ago. November 26th was the first day I started.
No way.
Yeah, and
wow.
yeah, Lisa Marie and Mike have just been, they have held me and nurtured me and given me the space and the time and just, yeah, and it's been very reciprocal, I think, too, which has been nice. Like, because in my healing, she was having a baby and a new business and a lot of things on her plate. So I've been able to give back in my capacity, which fills me up. And they've been understanding and flexible and compassionate with me. And so that reciprocation has just been like foundational and grounding for me.
Yeah. Not to mention the environment here too. So just to clarify, Lab Studios is an apothecary in Meaford, run by herbalist and naturopath Lisa Marie Holmes.
Yeah.
And where you're working a lot because Lisa Marie is she still on maternity leave?
She's not on mat leave. She's working mama. So we trade back and forth. She's here as much as she can be and doing consultations and I'm at the store as much as I can be, and we have a full movement studio. So getting back into that movement, which was a piece that I had definitely, honestly, I had never had. And so finding that, because growing up on the base, my mom didn't drive, sports just weren't a thing that we did. And there was recreation, but like, it just, it just wasn't for us. And my mom didn't drive, so she didn't take us
out places.
Yeah, and she had enough on the go with being single mom in it while dad was away, and my dad was away a lot. So so finding that connection.
Yeah, so you're in like this space of movement, and you're in a space that's all about facilitating healing. You've got all these practitioners running events upstairs, yoga, meditation, breath work, cacao ceremonies, and then you're running the shop or working in the shop with healing teas and tinctures and like what a beautiful, like the environment, the feel in the space is really lovely. So what a nice space to be in as you yourself are healing.
And to that point, because I'm fortunate to work here, so I have access to these. But in Halifax, I didn't work in a place like this. So I found and built community in other ways by attending. Like find a studio that you enjoy, find a modality. Yoga for me isn't always my go-to, like very vigorous yoga, but meditation and yin yoga is. So, there's lots of people that love vinyasa and process a lot through their vinyasa yoga. And so find a modality that works for you. For some people, it's hydrotherapy. For others, it's kickboxing or those rage rooms or, a combination of all of the above. So really finding those things that work for you. That's the ticket. Rock climbing. I have friends that boulder multiple times a week because they it clears them. My Nana goes to church, and I've told her, like, going to therapy, I feel the same as you leaving church, like that same kind of feeling. So whatever it is for you.
Whatever it is for you that helps you ground or heal in any way. Reconnecting to yourself. So how does this experience with PTSD, like what do you think you're going to do with this? Like you have essentially this whole body of experience from your own lifetime. How is this impacting your life going forward?
So one of the really key things I walked away from was that boundary. I cannot make the military lifestyle and community more important than Kayla as a person.
Right.
So what that means for me is working in my capacity. I can't go back into a position that I was doing before where it was 24/7. I had a work phone. I had kids calling me, staff calling me, parents calling me. So just that's a personal boundary that I
Yeah.
didn't know to set. Now I've learned that I need to set that.
Beautiful.
So I do a lot of volunteer work. I volunteer right now with an organization called Atlas, and we just developed an online toolkit that I can send you the link for and stuff for youth, military youth experiencing a post-traumatic stress injury.
Amazing.
So it's an interactive website with downloadables, everything I wish I had at 13 years old. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, we'll definitely put the link below in the show notes.
Yeah.
That's great. And to be part of that and be able to like witness like
exactly
that and its impact on other young people, like that must be another level of healing for you.
Exactly.
Like I think a lot of people can find some part of healing through like the witnessing of other people changing their story.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like part of this podcast is like we get to tell our own story. We are the writers of our own story. We don't have to live the story that we once said over and over and over. We can kind of rewrite it and retell it through the lens of like witnessing other people healing, right? And getting to experience what we experienced, but with help and in a different way, right? It helps to soften our own memories, our own experiences. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Exactly. So, and then further than that, providing support for military families, families with children, if they want to discuss different strategies, different modalities, different techniques, that kind of stuff. So that's a bit of a project that I'm working on bringing to light.
Is that through Atlas or this is on your own?
On my own and through Lab as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
That's great.
So, it's still in its infancy. It's a project that we've been discussing and learning how to provide that support here. We do have quite a bit of a military community here. So reaching those again now that I have the capacity to do that. And I was in a situation where I was being told no a lot. It was under working in the position I was in had a lot of confines, a lot of boundaries on what could be done, what could be offered, programs that were developed years before my time that I didn't really have a lot of flexibility with.
Oh, right.
And now learning that there's other approaches and maybe more holistic approaches and gentler approaches. Really sharing that in my own way. From my experience, I'm really excited to bring that to our community.
That's amazing. That's so exciting. So thank you so much for talking to me today. I feel like we've covered a lot. And I think before we sign off, maybe if you could go back to your 13-year-old self when you first started noticing that something was different. And that you were experiencing life in a different way than your other friends who were not military. If you could go back as kind of like a big sister to that younger version of yourself, what would you tell her now?
I mean, so much.
What's even one piece of advice so that she would be able to walk through that situation? And journey through with a little more ease.
You're not alone. I mean, it's all the cliches. You can do hard things. You're not alone. You're gonna stumble, but you're gonna get back up. And we're here for you. There's a good group of military youth that are almost all adults now that have walked the walk and talked the talk. And reach out, find that community, find the thing that lights you up. Find the thing that you believe in. I think when I go back in my journey, all of those times, there was always something that kept me going. So for me, it was working with military families one day. That was kind of, when I could see that, I could see light. So holding on to that one thing. What is one thing, whether it's breath work or yoga or a goal you have or a bucket list item, hold something in your sights to reach. Because when things get hard, when you're in the trench of it, you need something to hold on to. Find that one thing, that one person, maybe, that one that's going to be the top of the mountain that you can continue to reach for. The dark can be dark and it can be heavy, and there's support there. Find the community in those times, but keep something up there to look forward to. And as someone who is still on that journey, I'm still holding on to that mountaintop, and and every step I get, it's like a deep breath. It's like, okay, I got it, and I'm gonna be there. Yeah.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kayla.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me and sharing your story.
Well, that wraps up my conversation with Kayla Lamrock. I am so excited to have finished recording this first episode, and I'm grateful for you if you have stuck through the whole episode so far and you're at the end. So thank you for being here. I do want to talk to those of you who are looking for support with PTSD. If you were going to an herbalist and you were looking for specific herbal supports, well, it is very much like a one-on-one kind of basis. Herbs work differently in everybody. We kind of have general guidelines, but there's a lot more to take into consideration when formulating for somebody. But if you were looking for an area to research for your own nervous system health, I would say looking into nervines, which are herbs that really help to tone and strengthen the nervous system. Now, some of them are more stimulating, some are more sedating. There are different groups of herbs within that nervine category. And then there's also adaptogens, which are often used for immune health, but they're also really great for nervous system health. When used over time, nervines have this amazing ability to increase our tolerance for stress. Now, that can be immune stress or nervous system stress, emotional stress, and it can also be physical stress. These ones don't work as well acutely, but again, really, herbs they work differently in everybody. So maybe you do find one that works really well acutely for you. But generally, adaptogens are used over time to really build that system. Now, for acute treatment of maybe anxiety or PTSD or panic, I find myself personally, motherwort is kind of my go-to, along with milky oats. So one or the other or both of them together are herbs that work really well for me for anxiety or panic in the moment. Motherwort has this affinity for the heart, for really calming and soothing and relaxing the muscle of the heart. So if you have racing heart, and then also it works as a nervine to help support the nervous system and can really work on a lot of emotions. I find especially irritability and overwhelm. And then milky oats is a really wonderful trophorestorative for the nervous system. So it brings the nervous system into balance. If the nervous system is running too low, it'll bring it up. If it's running too high, it'll bring it down. So both of these herbs, for me personally, are wonders in acute situations. Now, that being said, I don't have PTSD, but I have worked with Alan Canerva, who was my trainer in neurolinguistic programming. He's based out of Guelph, Ontario, and he is ex-military and specializes in treating trauma, specifically military trauma, but many types of trauma and PTSD, and he is wonderful at his job. So I'll post his link below too if you want to reach out to him. And that's about it. So thank you for listening. Again, my business is Bloem Botanicals, who is the sponsor of this podcast because it's my own business. So that's how it works. So don't forget to check out bloombotanicals.ca, where you'll find all kinds of handcrafted fresh plant tinctures, herbal body oils, salves, flower essences, and more. This episode today is coming out on the winter solstice, December 21st. And today at midnight, actually, we are closing a giveaway for a year of flower essences. So I actually created this year-long program. It's called The Sacred Wheel. It includes 6 flower essences that take you through a journey over the course of 1 year. And it's really about kind of subtle inner transformation, finding your intuition, leaning into your inner wise woman, using discernment and all kinds of other wonderful things over the course of a year. So we are giving away one, so be sure to check that out on Instagram tonight. And a winner will be announced on Friday, the 22nd. Now, for the rest of you, the Sacred Wheel will be available as either a kit of 6 essences, or you can get it where it's paired with different body oils and bath salts throughout the year. So that's it for me for today. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you again soon.